last class, which was like 3 weeks ago. So we said we want to come back to our study of louder. You know what? It's not going to, I'm just going to do this. It's not sitting there. Well, so I said we're going to come back to our study of women in the Tanakh. And then I had 3 weeks off. They had something else. I didn't know that when I had suggested that. And now we have 2 weeks, and then I have a week off because I'm not going to be here, and then 1 more week before we break. So I thought, what am I going to do? You know, when we take a woman, we really kind of squeeze out of the psukim. We spend a little bit of time, 3, 4 classes each topic, and we don't have 2 now. So I chose something that is shayach to the parsha that we're studying about now, and it's about a woman, and it's about a woman that we hardly ever hear about. She's actually mentioned in Torah 3 times, and 2 of those times it's about which children she bore, and 1 it's who she married. So this is the story of Osnat. Okay, so this is the parsha, this is where it's about, so in this class and the next class. So let's go back to the beginning. When I say the beginning, I ask ourselves, where does she enter on the stage? Where does she come from? Why? How is she introduced to us? In general, where we are in the story. Yeah, is that better? Okay, remind me, please. Where we are in the story, Josef came before Paro. Oh, it's because I'm handling it too much. Let me try to do this. Josef came before Paro.
That's worse.
That's worse?
They're doing there, I can't hear.
No, okay, I'm going to try to, you know what, I'll try to stand still. Is that better? I'm not breathing. So when Josef,
Why don't you try putting it on again?
but you know, it doesn't
Try
sit
to
well.
your voice up,
It doesn't sit well.
as if you're not in the CIA. It's not a secret.
And you could mold it a little bit also.
I'm trying to mold it. Is this any better?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, let's go for that. So Joseph came before Paro and he sold his dreams. He interpreted his dreams. Now, beyond the interpretation, Paro also wanted to act upon not only his interpretation, but the advice that he gave. It's one thing to tell you that there's going to be a famine, 7 years of plenty, then 7 years of famine. What do we do with that? So then Joseph made suggestions how to go about solving that problem, how to go about sustaining Egypt during those years. And of course, this was with a lot of foresight, and he had this whole plan. So Joseph suggested this plan to Paro. Paro liked it. So beyond the interpretation, beyond the suggestion of the plan, now somebody has to activate that plan. And Paro decided, hey, you know, you're the perfect candidate, and he chose him. Now there's a problem. What is the problem? If we look ahead in the story later on, which is actually our last parsha where the brothers meet Joseph, and Joseph is asking his the people who tend to his household to prepare a meal for the brothers. So what happened there at that meal? Like, no, I take that back. That was not an exact question. How do they set up that meal? Let's look in the first source. And they set for him separately and for them separately. Who's them, him, and them?
Him is Joseph, and them is his brothers.
Or it could be him, Joseph, and them are the Egyptians. That's it. It depends why. And for the Egyptians who ate with him separately. So these are probably the people who tended to him or what have you. Why? Because the Egyptians could not eat food with the Hebrews, because it is an abomination to the Egyptians. Speak about racism, you know. So this is ancient Egypt. They won't even sit with them at the same table. As such, now Paro is now faced with a severe problem. He has an issue he has to deal with. He has to tend to the needs of his country. He has the perfect candidate to do so and to command this whole project, but they won't even sit with him. Never mind, would they listen to him? Would they accommodate? What was the plan? You know, they were supposed to give everything unto Paro, and he was supposed to sustain him. It was going from I don't think they had democracy there, but it's like what we're experiencing today. Give everything to the government and let the government take charge. This was Yosef's plan. Now, you have to have willing citizens for that. So Paro was concerned. Why would they want to listen to him? And there's another reason. First of all, he's a Hebrew. Second of all, he just came out of where? Jail. He's a slave. So the people are not going to look unto him and accommodate his directives, especially the way it unfolded. They were able, in the end, they literally gave their homes, their possessions, their selves, sold themselves as slaves, so to speak. Just give us food. So Paro foresaw this, and he has to do something. What should he do? He has to enable Joseph to command Egypt, and he has to enable it in a manner where the people would accept him. So what does he have to do?
Give him his ring.
So let's read. Let's see the words. What he basically is doing. Let's read inside and then you sum it up. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has let you know all this, there is no one as understanding and wise as you. You shall be appointed over my household, and through your command, all my people shall be nourished. Only with the throne will I be greater than you. So like he's his vice president big time. So Pharaoh said to Joseph, look, I have appointed you over the entire land of Egypt. And Pharaoh removed his ring. What's with the ring?
Symbol of power.
Power, authority, and placed it on Joseph's hand. And he attired him with raiment of fine linen. What's that about? A cloak, a mantle of royalty and status. And he placed the golden chain around his neck. So what is Pharaoh doing to Joseph? He's elevating him. He's changing his status. He's giving him like a kind of new identity. And all this for love of Joseph, more for need of Joseph, and to ensure that his people would listen, that they would accommodate. And he had him ride in his chariot of second rank, and they called out before him, this is the king's patron, appointing him over the entire land of Egypt. So what he did now was that he put him in a position where it would kind of motivate and convince the Egyptians that this is a leader and this is who we're going to follow. And he sums it off by saying, and Pharaoh said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh, so just remember who's the king, but besides you, no one may lift his hand or foot in the entire land of Egypt. Look how much power he's giving to him. And on top of all that, he's still not done. And Pharaoh names Joseph Tzofnat Pa'aneach. He gives him a new name, hence a new identity. And all this to enable the plan to be successful. We're almost done. He's going to do one more thing. Think. What else could he do to upgrade Joseph's status? Give him a wife. Why is a wife so important? Stability. Why would the citizens appreciate that the ruler has a wife?
He's not running away.
He's not running away. That's a good one. Didn't think of it that way.
She's Egyptian.
She's Egyptian. Okay. Or at least they think she's Egyptian. But we'll get to that soon. What else?
He's a son-in-law.
So because it wasn't Pharaoh's though. We'll get to in a minute who this was. But here's another thing. Citizens want the governor, the leader, the monarch to be married. Why?
More stable.
We said stability. But also, what is governing all about? It's about hearkening to the needs of the community, to the needs of the people, being kind of just and fair with them so that life will be able to be appreciated. So if somebody has a family, he understands what it means to have a wife, to have a family, to have a home, the needs. Somebody who's not, is like removed. He's in his own, as a matter of fact, to this very day, we see that. The people in Russia, they're not pleased with Putin. He doesn't have a family, doesn't know what it means to stand in line for food for my child, things like that. So it's very common, especially in ancient times, that the monarch has to have a family. So he understood this. And now he's giving him, in the next source 3, and he gave him Osnat. Now she's not his daughter. She's the daughter of Potiphar, the governor of On, for a wife. And Joseph went forth over the land of Egypt. So when does he go forth? Not after the ring, not after the chain, not after the mantle. Well, after the wife. In other words, now what Pharaoh has completed is the transformation given Yosef this new identity, and now he can go forth and people will listen to him. And that's exactly what happened. So, of course, our question is, who is this Osnat? So like I said before, she's mentioned only 3 times in Torah, twice in connection with the children that she gave birth to, within the context of Yosef's children, whom we know already, that they are Ephraim and Manasseh. But who is she and where does she come from? So this is very, very interesting. On the one hand, we could say, oh, she was just like chosen by Paro, like he was a shadchan, like. So what does Paro know about shidduchim for a person, the stature? He looks at him as a governor, but who is he? Yosef is the son of Yaakov Avinu. So obviously this is all being orchestrated from above. We're not just speaking about a marriage of convenience because Paro saw that this was the right thing to do. Evidently, this marriage was orchestrated from above. Paro thought it was all happening because he was one, but it wasn't. It was coming directly from, because our belief when it comes to marriage is that it's all in the hands of God, and it's bashert, and it's the meeting of 2 half souls, and they end up meeting even though they both could have gone through various different trials, tribulations, and journeys in life. Now they're meeting, and now this is what it's to be. So in order to understand that, we want to try to glean as much information as possible about this woman called Osnat and where does she come from. But since you mentioned before that she's only mentioned 3 times in Torah, the first time here when she marries, and the second time when she gives birth there. When she gives birth, and later when they enumerate the children of Yaakov, the descendants, so she's called Asher, those are Ephraim and Asher, that Osnat birthed unto Yosef. So where would we go when we don't have information in Torah? Remember, one of the ways when we're lacking information and we're trying to figure out something about a personality, we always go to the name and we kind of, try to understand from the name. Any suggestions for Osnat? So actually, there is a suggestion, and we wouldn't have gotten there on our own. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral Torah. We're going to go to the Midrash, and the Midrash has a lot to say about Osnat, and let's go step by step. So in the Torah itself, it says that she was Osnat bat Potiphar. So maybe if we would kind of decipher the code of Potiphar, who is this person, we would understand where she comes from. So in Shmos, one second. Sorry, it's not Shmos. This is source. Sorry, let me just check. I believe you should have this source. Do you have Pasuk Aleph Vayosef who write Mitzrayim?
Yes.
Yes. So this is now going back to the story of Yosef first coming to Egypt. And Yosef was brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, Paro's chamberlain, chief of the slaughterers, Sarah Tabachim, an Egyptian man, purchased him from the Ishmaelites who had bought him down there. Remember, perhaps those who are familiar with the story, that he was thrown into the pit, and then he was sold, but not immediately to the Egyptians, because the Torah mentions there are various different types of people, whether they're the Midyanim or the Midanim, and then they were sold by these Yishmaelim. So he kind of passed hands numerous times, and he ended up in the home of Potiphar. Potiphar purchased him as a slave. Why would anybody want to buy this 17-year-old boy as a slave? What about Yosef was interesting, attractive? He was attractive. In which way was he exceptionally attractive? His hair, his appearance, but perhaps even more than that. He was bright. He was bright. I thought you said he was white, and they're both right. He was white. We heard about the racism in Egypt, and then, this was a young man who had a different color skin. Egyptians are they're home, right? Kush, that's who they are. So here's this young boy, and they didn't, often encounter this colored type of person. So, this is somebody special. This is somebody different, and there's all kinds of insights into why he was attracted to him, but we won't go there, and so on. So if we look at the pasuk, Potiphar Sris Paro, and we just heard in our pasuk that Osnat was the daughter of Potiphera. Wonder if that's the same person. So we don't really know. Our sages tell us that Potiphar actually went through a certain change, a physical change. Let's not go there, and that's why he also changed his name. Yes, agreed, not, but whatever it was, we some of the sages identify him as the same Potiphar, some not. But if this Potiphar is Potiphera, then what?
He is going to rule over his master. He's going to be higher in stature than his master.
So wait a minute. He's already now been de-slaved, so to speak. His status had changed. So that's not an issue anymore because he used to work for this man. He doesn't work for him anymore. He works directly for Paro.
So in jail.
Yes, okay, but he came out of jail and he's now a free man and he's free to do as Paro instructs him. So yes, to a certain degree, that is interesting that now he is but what might that mean? What might that imply regarding Asnat? This Asnat, if she's Bat Potiphar, so either she's a biological daughter or not, we'll find out. But even before we go to the biology,
Then he must know her.
then he must know her. Then they grew up in the same home, right? I don't know about grew up, but Josef was there and he resided in that home for a while until he was thrown in jail. At that same time, Osnat is residing in this home. So how did she get there? Is she indeed the daughter of? So when the Torah says that Osnat bat Potiphar, in Torah we find numerous times bat shares the same root as the word bayit, home. So she may be a person of the household, but not necessarily a daughter. As a matter of fact, our sages say that he could not have children. So because he could not have children, somehow she came to his home. From where? From what? So who is she? What is her identity? But we're already kind of sensing that there's something going on here. If they were both residing in the same household for, we're not quite sure how much time this was. So where do we go? If we go to the Midrash will help us understand what is the origin of a snot. So let's look. And this is number 5. Ve'amru b'midrash. Now I have there lots of sources because every single one of these sources, Targum Yonasan, Pirkei Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Nechai, and so on, all these say the same thing. You know, in various different perhaps details and what, but I chose the one that had most details. But they're basically, this is a Midrash, it's kind of redeeming Osnat from her anonymity so that we should kind of gain some insight. Who is this that Joseph is married? Ve'amru b'midrash, ki Osnat bat Dina haita. Oh, Osnat is the daughter of Dina. Within which marriage? Not exactly a marriage. Okay, so we know. Haita mishchem ben Hamor. So that union between Shechem and Dinah brought forth the birth of Dinah, of Osnat. Where is Dinah at the time that she gives birth to Osnat? Where is she? She's back home. The conception was in Shechem, but she comes back home. So in this home of Yaakov Avinu is a young girl who is now pregnant, and she gives birth. So now they have in their home a child that was born out of wedlock. Who is this going to bother? Some people. Let's find out who. Ulefi shegirsha Yaakov mi beito. He had to send her away from his house. Why? Who do you think is behind this? Sending her away from the house. Remember Shimon and Levi? They were the ones that in their anger, in their fury, they wiped out the entire city of Shechem. So they were furious that now in the home, they have a child out of wedlock. So if they were concerned, that our sister is like a zonah, and now on top of that, we have this illegitimate child in this home, they couldn't bear it. Now remember what's going on behind all of this. This is Yaakov, his children. They're coming now to the land of Canaan upon the instruction of Hashem. They've gone through numerous trials and tribulations in Haran. Yaakov had it. And he's now coming where? To meet his father. His mother had passed on, and to settle in the land of, won't call it Eretz Yisrael now because it's not that as of yet. And now this Sarah, remember Yaakov, he has all these stars in this parsha that we're reading this week, we'll read on Shabbos, when he encounters, not in this parsha, which we read just this past parsha, when Josef introduced Yaakov to Pharaoh, he asked him, "How old are you?" And what's Yaakov's response? No, lot of trouble, difficulty all my life. And this is Tzarat Dinah. So it's interesting that the Mefarshim, the commentary, they mentioned, it started out with Tzarat Esav and it was Tzarat Dinah. Nobody mentions Tzarat Osnat. It's not mentioned there regarding Yaakov's tzaras. It was the brothers who decided that this is what they're going to do. We can't have an illegitimate child raised in the house of Yaakov. Yaakov mitaso shlema, like his bed is wholesome. These are the tribes. These are the Jewish people. So it says here, Lefike girsha Yaakov mibeito. So what is the connotation of legaresh?
Chase away.
Chase away. Doesn't sound so good, right?
Good.
Where's the first time in Torah that we have girush, sending away? Yishmael, Gareshet HaMazot, actually before that, Gan Eden, that Adam and Chava gurshu from Gan Eden. But what's interesting is that it does say that they were going to be sent out of, we're going to be chased out of Gan Eden. But then when they actually are leaving, the Torah says that they were sent out. Sent out. What's the difference?
Gentler. Sent is gentler.
Gentler. What else might it mean?
That they were sent out for a purpose.
For a purpose. It's a shlichut. The word shlichut comes from the root shalach. And he sent. That's very different from chasing out. So, for Adam and Chava, both of these are correct. They were chased out, so to speak, out of Gan Eden. And what was behind that? Life as in Gan Eden would not be the same anymore. So within that connotation, they're chased out of this comfortable life with all this awareness of godliness, speaking freely with God, life is easy, and so on. They were chased away from. But when they were sent out of Gan Eden, there's a shlichut that they need to uphold. There's something that needs to be done in this world. God wants godliness in this physical world, not within the context, not under the circumstances of a Gan Eden type lifestyle. So when we hear geresh, we also hear shlichut. Also, even when Yaakov was when he was fleeing, right? He's fleeing from his home from Esav. So it says that Rivka told him, you should flee, you should get out of Esav's way and so on. And his father, Vayishlach Yitzchak, and he sent him. In other words, my dear son, this is going to be your shluchos. You have to go through a process. There are things that you need to do. There are sparks of godliness that you need to reveal in faraway places, and then you will come back. So it's about shlichut. So, ולפי כשגירשה יעקב מביתו, והושיבה בתוך סנה. We were speaking about the name before and trying to see what we can glean from the actual name. So she's called Osnat because Hoshiva. It's interesting. Girsha, he sent her away. Now that's a girush because she's not going to be with her family. She's not going to be with her close ones, and she's going to have to fend for herself. So that's the girush end of it. But Hoshiva, what does that mean? He sat her down, he placed her. So what does that mean? He placed her.
Placed inside a snare.
Placed inside a snare. How do you understand? What is a snare anyway? We know it from Moshe, the bush, right? Mm-hmm. So could we assume that the snare is some kind of a treehouse? Maybe something like that. In other words, some kind of location, not too far, so he could always keep an eye on her. But in the home, she was not going to stay. And the very fact that it states Vehoshiva, when our sages create a medrash, the usage of words is important because they're instructive. So they're not just giving us information. What do you mean Hoshiva? He sat her down? No, we're trying to, what you tell me, what does it mean when it says Hoshiva? Like a yishuv, meaning he made it comfortable for her. There was food there was lodging there, whatever it was, some kind of a tree house outside of the home that Osnat was not going to live. And she is going to be on some kind of shlichut. Now, since Yaakov is aware of the shlichut, but he has no idea where the shlichut is going to take her, and he doesn't know how to direct her. If he knew, then he would be able to guide her and give her instructions. So what is his concern? Think, without even looking in the Midrash, what is his concern? Sending away his grandchild to who knows where? What's his concern about her? He's not going to be so concerned as to what's going to happen to her, because that's whose concern.
That's concerned.
That's Hashem's concern. Obviously, he sensed that this was going to be a shlichut. Obviously, he sensed that this was way beyond him. Obviously, this is going to be orchestrated from God. And he said to himself, you know what? Somebody has to worry. I'm not going to worry. I'll let Hashem worry, which is something we should do in our lives. Just like sometimes, Hashlech al Hashem yahafa. Let him worry about this. So I just need to take care of her and ensure. What does he need to ensure?
She also needs to know who she is.
She needs to know her identity, and she needs to maintain that identity. I don't know where you're going to end up. I don't know what's going to be. Obviously, there's some shlichut out there, but maintain your identity. So this is what it says. Kashar la ktav b'tzavara. He made for her an amulet, like a kind of a necklace with a, and to hang onto her neck. V'katuv bo. And it had this parchment in this locket. Kol hamidabek bach midabek bezaro shel Yaakov. Whoever will become attached to you, davek milshon devek, as in glue. So whoever bonds with you, should know that they are bonding with the seed of Yaakov. And he put that in the amulet, and this was her necklace. So that was her, as we call in Hebrew, the Teudat Zehut. This was her identification papers. Uva Gavriel. Who's Gavriel? A malach. Does it ring a bell anywhere?
And he brought it to Israel.
Have we heard about Gavriel somewhere before? Not openly. Remember when Josef was going to see his brothers? Umatzao ish basadeh, and this man, who is this man? Rashi says, Gavriel Hamalach. Okay, so Gavriel looks out for waywards, that's what he does. V'heviah Mitzrayim, and he brought her to Mitzrayim, lifnei eshet Potiphar. So he knew exactly where he was bringing her, because she's on a shlichut, she has a destiny. And Malachim know. So he brought her to her because there's somebody else who's in that household. This is the Potiphar that Josef was sold to. Vigidalta. And she brought her up.
brought her up.
They didn't have any children. She was only too happy. She was also a white woman. Remember, that's an issue in those days. Uksheba Yosef leMitzrayim. So we're not sure what age this was. Was it before Yosef became? According to this Midrash, it was before. So she was brought there as a young girl. In other words, Gabriel didn't let her live in the treehouse for long. So he brought her, and she came to Mitzrayim. Uksheba Yosef leMitzrayim. And when Yosef arrived in Mitzrayim, Yatzu kol hanashim lir'oto michamat yofyo. They were, oh, white man, and he's so attractive. It was something it was a spectacle.
But she was also white.
Yes, she was also no, but all the women, not
I
she,
know,
all the
that's what
women
I'm
every
saying,
time.
she
Yes, she
was
was
white.
also white. Kedichtiv bnot sa'ada leishur. This is part of the bracha that Yaakov gave to Yosef. There's a deep meaning that we're not going to go into that now. V'kol achat zoreket lo chefetz o tachshit. They're throwing I think that's where it comes from, Any simcha, and you throw it. God, this is the first time we hear of it in Torah, candy. But actually, here it's not about candy, it's chefetz o tachshit. What did these women want when they were throwing these chefetz, these items, or jewelry? Attention. And they wanted favors. You at this point, he wasn't, he was just in the house of Potiphar. So he was just an attractive young man. And who knows? And Potiphar is an important person in Mitzrayim. He's the chamberlain of Paro. So let's just make some kind of connection. So they were flirting with him. So they were throwing things at him. V'zo, this is Osnat, lo hayala ma lisrok. More than any of the other women, she wants his attention. Because what is he to her?
No, he's her uncle.
Uncle. He's her uncle.
What are you
He's probably around her age because Joseph was one of the youngest brothers. But this is her uncle. This is, first of all, he's a white man amongst all the other people. Second of all, she knew that there was something there. This is interesting because it doesn't say that she recognized him. It doesn't say that she knew exactly who it was, but probably what did she recognize in him? He looked like Yaakov, and he was the same color skin as she was, so he probably comes from Canaan. I'd love his attention. Maybe I'll be able to glean from him how my family is, who does he know, maybe how I could get back home. She was now a grown girl. So, lo haya la ma lisrok. V'zarka lo hakamea shebetzavara. So she threw that amulet. Let's comment on that. How risky is that?
If she loses it. If he doesn't pay attention, then she's lost her identity.
Since she's lost her identity papers. How could she prove that she is the Bat of Yaakov? And let's bring it into the context of today's day and age. How could she prove she's Jewish, so to speak? Then it wasn't halachically as such, but how could she prove anything? It's interesting. Just today, I heard that in Israel, there's a yeshiva bacher. He was going on dating, and then he finds out that he's not even Jewish. His mother told her. Her mother was from Ukraine, and the father became a Baal Tshuva, and he sent him to yeshiva, and now he was going out on shidduchim. So the family of the girl was investigating who and what and how, and they discovered. But now happy ending to that story, because he was obviously very shaken by this, and he's now going through Giur, and hopefully they will get married and so on. So, it's a big deal. This is why Giur Kalacha is a very important thing. What are your papers? So this was the only thing she had, and she's risking it. What does this tell us about Asmat? She's brave, a lot of emunah, senses shlichus, senses that something is going on here. This is totally out of the ordinary. Okay. V'nistakel bo Yosef shaita bat bito shel Yaakov. And Yosef opened up that kamea, and he knew to read Hebrew, which nobody else did. So now So he was very pleased. And then this was at the time when Joseph was already, exposed to the public. And so when Osnat is suggested as a wife, so he was only too happy to marry her. But what did he do with that kamea? Let's bear this in mind because we're going to address that in the future, in our next class. So it says, Hitzniel. He hid it. He put it aside and ensured that it would not get lost. Why?
To prove that his children are Jewish.
To prove that his children are Jewish. And not, that they're the children of Yaakov. We know that there's a lot of stress in Torah at the end of Sefer Bereshis and at the beginning of Sefer Shmos. These are the children that are coming to Mitzrayim, and every single one of them is named. We need to know who they are. This is lineage. This is identity. This is very important. Okay, so it's clear that she was destined for him, and it's clear that they both have a shluchus which they need to fulfill here in Mitzrayim. So now Joseph and Osnat both comprehended, and now they get married, and he willingly is only too happy to marry her. And so that Paro gives Osnat to Yosef. Who is giving Osnat to Yosef? Hashem, but we would think that, okay, so this is quite miraculous and it's an interesting story how all the details unfold, but there's more to it, said the Midrash. We're wondering, this connection between Osnat and Yosef, after all, if we maintain that they were both growing up in the same or spend time in the same household, did they know each other? We don't know. First of all, in ancient times, women lived separately from men. The women even had, even the wives, so to speak, they had their tents, they had their own domain and so on. So it could very well be that they crossed paths, but they never really knew each other, so to speak. Also, at that time, she was brought up in that household as a daughter. And he's brought up in that household as
Slave.
not a slave in serving, and then and without any kind of real care and concern, because they were only too happy to throw him in prison. And it was all because of Osnat's stepmother, so to speak. So it's a really complicated situation, and we don't hear of them knowing each other. And so once again, if we look into source 6, it's the Tzor Hamor. This is a commentary on Bereshis. It says, Amru Rabotenu Bazohar. This is taken from Kabbalah. Ve'osnat bat Potiphar, hi isha re'uya ume Hashem hayta lo. She was destined for him. Like we said before, she was destined for him. So if she was destined for him, though they have a bond. So then we're asking, could it be that they actually had some kind of interaction before? Could it be that there was any kind of real bond between them? So once again, we're going to look into source 7, into into our final source. And he says as follows. What happened? This is from Yalkut Shimoni. What happened after Yosef was thrown into the pit? Then the story unfolds as he comes to Paro. But before he was thrown in the pit, he wasn't immediately thrown in the pit. Let's look. Potiphar Ratza Lahargo. Potiphar, the Midrash tells us that he was sentenced to death. Makes perfect sense. This is how they, I guess any household member who's a slave, who engages with the wife, obviously. Exactly. Amra le. She said to him, who said to him? Osnat said to Potiphar. She has a voice in this home. She's brought up as a daughter. She has a voice. Al tahargenu, v'tovad meotecha. If you kill him, what's going to come out of that? Meantime, he's your slave. So if you kill him, you'll have nothing. Yeah, you paid for him. Remember, you invested in him. You paid a handsome price for Yosef. So don't kill him. Ela tachavishena. Put him into jail. Lachavosh means to bind, to tie up. Afilu came, even though she said that, Ratzah lahargo. You know what? I'm sorry. I apologize. Amrale, this is Potiphar's wife, not Osnat. Soon Osnat is coming into the picture. She was the one that said, she says, yeah, well, she was behind this whole story anyway. Like, let's make something out of it. Put him into jail. He'll take care of the other, prisoners or what have you. Afilu ken ratzah lahargo. Potiphar was very angry. He wanted to kill him. Ad shebat Osnat beseter el Potiphar. So quietly, without letting that, horrible stepmother know, she comes to Potiphar, v'nishbe'alo, v'sipra ha'emet, and she told him. What did she tell him? What was the truth? Who Josef was? Not who she was, not who Josef was. What really happened with his wife? Osnat was in the house. This was part of her destiny, that she was privy to what this woman had made up this whole story about Josef. Remember, nobody else was in the house. Osnat was. She overheard, she saw, she gave testimony to this. Now she told him the truth. Amarla. Now, so Potiphar listened to her. Why? Why did he trust her? Because it was all coming from God, This, sorry?
Maybe he knew his wife.
I was just going to say, nobody else spoke up. But she spoke up, Nikarim divrei emet. You can see when the words are true. Amar la hakadosh baruch hu. So Hashem responded. Because what is this response from Hashem? To what? To speaking up. Why should there be a response to that? She was taking a tremendous risk. She could have been beheaded in a moment, right? And it's interesting that nothing came out of it afterwards. And here we see the relationship between Potiphar and his wife, because otherwise he would have confronted her. And he knew his wife. Amar la kadosh baruch hu chayech, I promise you, by your life. Ho'il ve'at lomedet alav zchut. You came to save his life. Shvatim ani ma'amid mimeno. He's going to have a portion in the Shvatim, because Joseph was just Joseph himself. He would be one tribe. Now he's going to have children with you, and there'll be two of them, and both of them will be considered as tribes. So this is how the Midrash fills in the missing pieces of who this Osnat is. So I now I have a couple of minutes, I just want to summarize. Bearing this in mind, and bearing in mind what Tzor Hamor said, that they were destined for each other. So if we can actually summarize and see how they were. In both cases, what? What was the relationship between their original nuclear family and them? They were both sent away. There was antagonism between the nuclear family. Here was the brothers, here was the uncle, and they were sent away. So their presence was disturbed. We have to get rid of this. So, and not only were they sent away, they were sent out of that home and ended up in Mitzrayim. They both ended up. On the way to Mitzrayim, they're assisted by Gabriel. Remember, Gabriel helped Osnat, and Gabriel orchestrated the meeting with the brothers and Joseph before. Now, for both of them, there is significance in the city of Shechem. Where does Shechem come into the picture regarding Joseph? He's buried there, but why is he buried there? That's where he had his total derech eretz for his father. When his father said, "Hello, achecha roim b'Shechem," they are, and go see if everything's okay. Because after the story, his father was worried. The story of Shechem ben Hamor, the father was worried. Yaakov was worried. Now they could kill my children. They're not near home. So he was going out to Shechem. So this was his Mesirat Nefesh, to fulfill what his father had said. He could have told his father, "Why can't you just send somebody else? You know that I don't get along with my brothers so well." No, he went. So he went to check out the flocks and the brothers in Shechem. And Shechem, of course, was the place where Dinah was kidnapped, where Osnat was. Dinah was kidnapped, and there we have Osnat. Both end up in Mitzrayim. Both end up in the house of Potiphar. And I'd like to add one more thing. two more things. Number one, both suffer as a result of intended or actual, depending, of what? Of immoral behavior. You know, with Shem, and here it's with Eshet Potiphar. So it wasn't actual, but it was intended. So they both suffered that, and they both reached like bottomless pits. In Yosef, it was literally a bottomless pit. In her, it's like some kind of a treehouse or whatever. She's lost, and then they rise to these exalted positions. So they both had that. And one last thing, this amulet. What is she carrying on her? What's in that amulet? It's her identity, but what's written in that? She's the daughter of Yaakov. In other words, it's a connection to God. It's a connection to Ribono Shel Olam. That's what she's wearing constantly on her. It's like a mezuzah, so to speak. It's guarding her. But what's in that? It's the hand written by Yaakov Avinu. So she's carrying this holy amulet on her. And regarding Yosef in Mitzrayim, what does it say? That wherever he went, Potiphar noticed it, Paro noticed it, Shem Shamayim Shagur B'fiv. He always would say, remember when Paro asked him, to interpret the dream, says, whatever God will put in my mouth, because that was his nature, that was his speech, that was the way he communicated, always referring to Hashem. So he's always walking with the name of Hashem in his mouth, and she's always carrying this amulet, and they were destined unto each other. So in our next class, we're going to continue exploring this a bit more. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Connected. Oh,
But she said it very nicely. This is Amy. She's next. I'm gonna get a coffee. You want a coffee?
Oh my gosh, they really rigged this up. We have a box.
We have a
We're good to
microphone.
go. Hi. I don't even know what this is.
What is what? Oh, she attached that.
This is new. Okay, I'm just gonna leave
She
it.
had it by her, on her.
I'm loud.
Feel loud.
I'm
Yeah,
very-
she's very, yeah.
Nobody's ever accused me of being quiet. I get shushed all day long. I don't want to ear my, okay, it seems like it's off. I do not want to use it. Okay, stretch. Got something.
This is my shoulder. What does it here? I get one every year.
That's right. I have one of these.
One of
Right. Or behind the beam, you advertise for them. The issue.
Okay. I gave out all my source sheets, so if there's not enough, if you don't mind sharing, I apologize.
And you have one?
They're coming around. They're coming, I think, down the back row, but we might need to spread them out a little. I apologize. I thought I made more. I must have grabbed them from the copier before they were done. I was like, oh, here we go. Yeah. Tomorrow when I get back, I'm going to see a little mini stack. Oops. Oops, oops. Okay. Okay, I apologize for the shortcoming. Okay. Let me just turn on the recording function here. All right, should we start? Does anyone else want? I feel bad. It was such a quick turnover. Tea, coffee. Anyone? Okay. All right.
Yes, you gotta speak up loud. The voice doesn't, for some reason, project.
I know the acoustics in here are not great. Can you hear me though now? Is this good? Okay, I will project. So we're going to start a new 3-part series tonight, and our topic is Birchot Yaakov. So we're kind of in the zone between, the Parshiot. So we're hitting Parshat Vayechi, which is where these brachot live, this coming Shabbos. So we're kind of like in between Vayigash and Vayechi, and it'll carry us through the beginning of Shmot. So we're not really doing a class in Parshat HaShavua, but we're trying to follow along a little bit with something timely. So we'll spend a few weeks on Birchot Yaakov. So let's start by looking in our first source, which is the introduction to Birchot Yaakov in Breshit Perek Memtet. So if you look at just the 2 little psukim, Vayikra Yaakov el banav, Yaakov calls his sons together, Vayomer, and he says, Heyasvu va'agida lachem et asher yikra etchem be'acharit hayamim. Gather, and I'm going to tell you what will happen to you in the end of days. Now, Yikra, if you're a very astute speaker of Hebrew, Yikra here is with an aleph, which should mean will call to you. Almost unanimously, our Mefarshim say, yeah, but it means Yikra, like what will happen with a hey. Just like almost nobody interprets that word literally. So we're going to go with the flow here, and we're going to say what will happen to you in the end of days. It's nearly unanimous amongst our commentaries. Hikabtsu v'shimu b'nei Yaakov, gather and listen, sons of Yaakov, v'shimu el Yisrael avichen, and listen to Yisrael, your father. So before we get into, and we have 3 nights here, 12 sons, 3 nights. So we're not going to exactly divide them into 3 groups of 4. We'll treat it a little bit less mathematically. But our main topic here for tonight is the intention Yaakov has in calling his sons together. Okay, this is an interesting gathering. What's Yaakov's purpose? What's his intent? And we're going to see that there are some widely diverse opinions as to what Yaakov thinks he's doing when he gathers his sons together. And then hopefully we'll look at a few of the brachot, and we'll save the rest for the next 2 times. So we'll start with Rabbeinu Bechaye, and we're going to look at 4 major schools of thought as to what Yaakov's purpose is in gathering his children together. Again, he could have blessed them individually. He didn't have to have this whole big scene that he gathers. According to some of our midrashim, he's in his bed and they're all gathered around the foot of the bed. So this is like a kind of like this big dramatic moment. What's Yaakov's intention in making this dramatic gathering? So Rabbeinu Bechaye starts us off. He says something interesting. He says, Amruba Midrash, Hitchil Yaakov birchato mimakom shepasak Yitzchak aviv levarechoto. So he's picking up a tradition, says Rabbeinu Bechaye. Yaakov's picking up blessing his sons, where his father Yitzchak left off blessing him. Shene'emar, Vayikra Yitzchak el Yaakov vayevarechoto. Yitzchak also called in Yaakov and blessed him. There's the blessing that Yaakov takes. We've spent a lot of time together on Yaakov and Esav. There's the blessing that Yaakov takes from Esav, from Yitzchak. And then there's a blessing that Yaakov was always meant to have. Vayevarech, I just lost my place. Vayikra Yitzchak el Yaakov vayevarechoto. Yitzchak blesses Yaakov. And then the Midrash goes on. V'hitchil Moshe v'zot habracha mimakom shepasak Yaakov birchato. And then after Yaakov gives his blessings, not his children give blessings. That's not like the next phase in the blessings of the Jewish people. But Moshe Rabbeinu picks up the thread of those blessings, and he's next to take that tradition. Yitzchak blessed Yaakov, Yaakov blessed his sons. Then Moshe is going to pick up the thread of those blessings and bless the tribes. We're definitely going to have to look at Moshe's brachot because they're sort of bookends. Yaakov blesses his children, the original, the 12 sons, and then Moshe is going to bless at the end of his tenure with them the 12 tribes that came from those original 12 sons. And just as a point of fact, which we'll probably refer to as we go through our next 3 weeks, it's interesting to note that throughout Tanakh, and I know we've discussed this before, the nature of the tribe is going to always reflect the nature of the son. So I know we've said that. I just want to make sure we say it again so that we're all on the same page. So Ruvain, who loses his Bechora in his own personal life, the Mefarshim, the Midrashim, Chazal in particular, say like, well, of course Shevet Ruvain joined in Korach's argument. They were angry about losing their birthright. Well, we're not talking about individuals who lost birthrights. We're talking about the tribe that was the firstborn tribe losing its tribal birthright. So that's very typical of Chazal to view the nature of the tribe in terms of the nature of the original son. So it will be fascinating, maybe part 3, maybe part 2, I'm not sure yet, but it will be fascinating to look at Yaakov's bracha and Moshe's bracha to the same unit, to Ruvain to Shevet Ruvain, to Shimon to Shevet Shimon, and see, that's a trick because there is no bracha to Shevet Shimon by Moshe. I didn't mean that to be a trick. It was just a bad example. But we're going to look at those and we're going to say, like, let's see if, the brachot reflect the same idea and the same nature of the original son and the tribe. So Yitzchak blesses Yaakov, Yaakov blesses his sons, Moshe picks up Mimakom shepasak Yaakov, V'hitchil David Sefer Tehillim Be'ashrei Ha'ish, the very first 2 words of Sefer Tehillim, Parak Aleph, Ashrei Ha'ish, Mimakom shepasak Moshe birchotav. Moshe ends his bracha with the words Ashrecha Yisrael, Ashrei, Ashrecha. David picks up that thread, says the Midrash, and says Ashrei Ha'ish, and picks up the blessing from where Moshe left off. So it's this interesting Midrash about kind of passing the torch, right? First Yitzchak blesses Yaakov. Yaakov is, of course, the child through which the Jewish future will descend. Yaakov picks up that baton and blesses his sons. Moshe picks up the baton from there and blesses the tribes. And many years later on, David uses those same words to bless, opening his Sefer Tehillim by blessing the now giant Am Yisrael. Beautiful idea. But basically, based on Rabbeinu Bechaye, Yaakov feels like this is a tradition. He's the next link in the chain. I think I've shared this before, but I have a colleague, and it just came up again, who I've heard say this a few times now in the course of my working with her, and it always strikes me as so unbelievable. When asked, like, why do you keep the mitzvot that you keep? Why do you do the things that you do? Why do you still, we all have choices in life. Why do you choose to be an observant adult? Why do you do this mitzvah, that mitzvah? Her answer, I've now heard it, like, she doesn't realize I'm keeping track, but she's been consistent for the last, I don't know, however many years I've known her. She always says, like, who am I to, like, break the link in the tradition? Who am I to say, well, women have been doing this for thousands of years, or Jews have been doing this for thousands of years, and, like, I'm going to not do it. I'm going to drop the baton. And I always get that feeling when I read this Rabbeinu Bechaye, this Midrash, like, Yaakov doesn't want to drop the baton. He doesn't want to lose the momentum of blessing the people. And Moshe and David seem to clearly also have that feeling of, like, picking up that baton and saying, who am I to break this beautiful chain of blessing the people? It's a very nice idea. We'll leave that aside. It's a nice idea, but we're going to try to dig a little deeper. So we'll turn to Rashi. This is a relatively well-known Rashi, and it's really interesting, and we'll try to give some support to Rashi once we establish what Rashi says. So if you look at Rashi, source 3a, Rashi goes in a completely other direction. This is not a tradition. Yaakov has a very specific intent when he gathers his sons. Bikesh Yaakov legalot et haketz. Yaakov wants to reveal the news of Mashiach. Legalot et haketz, pretty well known. V'nistalka mimenu shchina. But then his Ruach HaKodesh leaves him because God doesn't want Yaakov to reveal the information. And now he's got, like, this whole gathering. They're all waiting. He's like, guys, I have something big I'm going to tell you. And it like, I'm very used to this. And his mind goes blank. Like, wait, what was I just going to say? Says Rashi, V'hitchil omer dvarim acherim. So he's like, okay, I'll bless you. Like, I gotta, you're here. I'm going to do something with your time and my time. This is weird, but a fascinating approach, right? That Yaakov actually had a completely different intention. He wasn't planning on blessing his sons. That was not why he called them together. Like we said, he could have blessed them one at a time. He blesses Ephraim and Manasseh separately, right? They get their own blessing. No one else is in the room except Yosef. So there was no reason why he had to have this moment. I mean, we could argue there's a good reason, but no specific reason that Yaakov has to have them all together in order to give them each a blessing. Yaakov and Esav aren't together when Yitzchak blesses them. There's no precedent for having all your children standing in front of you to tell them each what you want to tell them. And says Rashi, yeah, that's because that wasn't his original plan. And this is plan B. And he's filling this awkward silence in a way with brachot. So this whole concept that Yaakov is trying to tell them something about the Kates, the messianic times, is actually mentioned in this Malbim, source 3b, And he quotes an interesting midrash, which I would have liked to quote the original medrash. I couldn't find it. So I quoted the Malbim. I'm still looking for this medrash. But the Malbim, listen to this. He says, Uva midrash heyasfu me'aseret hashvatim v'hi kabtzu l'shevet Yehuda u'Binyamin. He says there was still a reference in what Yaakov said to the ultimate geula, to the Ketayamim. God removes all actual concrete information about the Mashiach from Yaakov's mind. That's just exactly the moment that he wants to share it. But Yaakov still manages to sneak in a few oblique references. So if you look back up at source 1, there are 2 verbs that look seemingly synonymous, one in Pasuk Aleph, one in Pasuk Bet, and they both mean to gather. Hey asfu v'hi kabtzu, right? Gather and gather. Of course, there's nuance, of course, there's connotation, but essentially, if we were doing a bad job translating just, general translation, a generic translation, gather and gather, come together and gather. Assemble, come together, but essentially mean the same thing. Malbim picks up on that with his midrash, and he says, well, that's because they actually refer to 2 different things. Hey asfu refers to the ingathering of the 10 lost tribes. V'hi kabtzu, that's in the times of Mashiach, and he kabtzu refers to the return to Israel of the 2 non-lost tribes, which is those of us sitting here, right? Presumably. We're presumably all from Yehuda, Binyamin, or Levi. There may have been a few little pockets of the 10 lost tribes that moved down to Malchut Yehuda when their northern kingdom got expelled. So here and there may be like a random person from another tribe. But we presume that if we're not from Shevet Levi, which we would probably know, right? If you're a Bat Levi or a Bat Kohen, or you're married to a Levi or Kohen, you would know. Everyone else we presume is from Yehuda or Binyamin. Those are the tribes that stayed together and went into Galut Bavel and then returned. So there are 2 different verbs used, says the Malbim, and he's going to explain why. And they reference the ingathering of exiles from far and from, we'll call, near. Okay, near meaning we're not lost, we're just not in Israel. And he explains, let's just go down to the second line after the parentheses, Upeirashti sham, on a pasuk in Yeshayahu that also uses these 2 terms, Ve'asaf nidche Yisrael unefutzot Yehuda yikabetz, Asaf for Yisrael, Yikabetz for Yehuda. Says the Malbim, Upeirashti sham she'aseret hashvatim einam mefuzarim rak nidachim. There's a difference between something that's lost and something that's scattered. If I'm searching for a lost object, I don't know where it is. But if I'm trying to collect scattered items, I know exactly where they are. I just have to go through the process of collecting them from all those, disparate places. So he says, Nidachim shelo noda mikomam utrichim asifa. Le'esof is to gather things, to bring them back, to collect them from a place unknown, to go out and search for them and to bring them in. She'asifa moremin hachutz al hapnim. To gather means from outside to inside, to bring in that laundry from the line. The laundry's not lost, but it's outside and you got to bring it inside. V'shevet Yehuda u'Binyamin heim nifutzim ba'arba kanfot haaretz. Yehuda and Binyamin were scattered on the 4 corners of the globe. Ve'inam nidachim, but we're not lost. Ki noda mekomam. We know exactly where we are. We know there's this many, if you look at the latest research, I just keep getting posts on my Instagram, right? There are this many Jews in this country, and this many Jews in France, and this many Jews in England, and this many Jews in Australia. We have a pretty good sense of where Yehuda and Binyamin have scattered. Okay, so 2 different verbs, says the Malbim, reflecting 2 different ingatherings of exiles, but both ingatherings have to do with Yemot HaMashiach. So even though the information Yaakov wanted to share may have disappeared, Malbim says, yeah, but he somehow still sort of hints that there's going to be this kibbutz galuyot at the beginning of Zman Yemot HaMashiach, which is, again, a beautiful idea. Okay, so our first option was tradition, passing the baton of blessing. Second option was he's not actually trying to bless them, but he's got to go to plan B when plan A fails him. So he gives them blessings. But again, he hints to the fact that you guys are going to end up in a lot of different places. And during Yemot HaMashiach, you're all going to be gathered and collected back home. Ibn Ezra goes in a completely different direction, source number 4. And he says, source number 4, it's Asher Yikra Etchem, Diber HaNavi La'atid. These aren't really blessings. But the Navi, Yaakov, is simply telling each son things that will happen to them in the future. V'ta'u ha'omrim shehem brachot. Those who have said these are blessings are mistaken. Ba'avur shematzu besofa yivarechotam, v'ayeh birchat Ruvain, Shimon, v'Levi. If you look at the actual text of the brachot, the first three are not brachot that anybody would want. They're not blessings, and we'll get there hopefully tonight, right? They're not blessings. They're nothing really that positive about them, and we'll do a little research to see exactly what Yaakov might be trying to say, but they don't fall under the category of blessing. Val derech hanevua amar zot. Again, unlike what Rashi said, he wants to give a nevuah and it eludes him. In this case, Ibn Ezra says, no, these are exactly the predictions that Yaakov wants to give. He's trying to give his sons information about what will happen to them in the future. He knows exactly what he wants to say. Vizot asher diber lahem avihem. And what he ends up saying in the next part of Parak Memtet is these predictions for each son. Ve'achar kain barechotam. And afterwards, vayevarechotam, because that word appears later in the psukim in the parak. After Ruvain, you're this, Shimon, you're that, Levi, you're this, da 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 da. Then the pasuk says vayevarechotam Yaakov, that he blesses them. Velo hiskir hakatuv habrachot. The Torah doesn't mention those brachot. Those are actual brachot. After he tells them this is your future, your future, your future, he gives them brachot. Those are not essential for our enduring knowledge of Jewish history or identity, so they're not in the Chumash. Okay, so according to Ibn Ezra, these are not blessings; they're just prediction of future events. And when Yaakov says in Pasuk Aleph, "Ve'agida lachem et asher yikra etchem be'acharit hayamim," he doesn't mean Klal Yisrael like Mashiach. He means etchem, to you, this is what will happen, and to you, this is what will happen, and to you, this is what will happen. He's giving them each this individual look or glimpse into their future. I don't remember where I saw this, but remember when I first read Pasuk Aleph, I said Yikra with an Aleph, but we're reading it as Yikra with a Hey, what will happen to you? I don't remember where I read this, and I have to find it. I meant to look it up again and make a note. Somebody, it's a beautiful idea, said these events are Mikre. These are the things, not that are random, but these are the things that are out of their control from their own human Bechira Chafshi. These are the things, what's Yaakov telling them? He's not telling them, tomorrow you're going to wear the yellow sweater. That's in their control. He's telling them about things that will be out of their control, meaning in Hashem's hands. These are things that regardless of their choices, these are not things they'll have any control or influence over. These are asher yikre etchem. These are things that are going to happen to them. Yaakov, of course, can't predict their future, what they're going to eat, wear, do, say, because those are all things within human control. He's telling them things that they wouldn't otherwise have any control over the outcome, which is a very interesting idea. Okay, so that was 1, 2, 3. Tradition wants to really tell them about Mashiach, but can't, so he goes with blessings, or future predictions, not blessings in any way, really, shape, or form, because the blessings come later. He's simply telling each tribe what will happen in their future. Now we're going to get to the fourth answer, and that's the answer of the Abarbanel, and it should be on the back of the first page, source number 5a. It's a little bit long, but he does a really good job explaining what we can expect in the section of brachot that's to come. So we'll read it a little quickly, and someone has to keep an eye on the time for me because there are no... Amazing. Okay. So says the Abarbanel. Okay, the way Abarbanel works, sorry, if you're familiar, you're familiar. If not, he asks like all his questions, and then he gives all his answers. Okay, so when he starts here, Hashe'elah habet, that's because I cut off the first question, Hashe'elah ha'alef, and he also asks 18 more after, but I dotted. I'm giving us his second question and his answer to his second question, just keeping it easy. So Hashe'elah habet betachlit habrachot ha'ela bichlal. That's our question. What's the purpose of these brachot? Right? Who established, other than the idea of the tradition and passing the baton, who established this precedent that Yaakov was going to gather his whole family and bless each one, in front of the other? V'zeki efshar shenomar shehaya tachlit Yaakov b'tzava'a hazot lebanav ela le'echad me'arba tachliot o lekulam. He says it's got to be one of the following four, or all of the. It's got to be among. There are only four possible reasons it could be. Spoiler alert: he's going to reject all four of those and give a fifth. Okay, but he's setting us up. He's saying, in theory, we're looking at these 12 sons. We're reading what Yaakov says about them, and we're saying there are really four things going on here. And let's see if we can figure out which 1, 2, 3, or all four of these things are Yaakov's intent. So he says, Im shehayu b'derech bracha utfila l'shem kol ha'mevorachim sheyavarchim. One possible tachlit is to bless them. Ukemo shekatuv acharehem vayivarechotam. Right? It says afterwards he blessed them. Ish asher kevirchato beirachotam. Each man according to his blessing. So option number one, he's blessing them. Option number two, v'im shahaya lehochichem al hamaasim hamagunim asher ra'a bahem. Maybe he's rebuking them for their character flaws. Ve'al ze nomar v'zot asher diber lehem avihem vayevarechotam. He says the rebuke and then blesses them, right? Again, we had that vayevarechotam at the end of the section that our mefarshim are struggling with. But we're trying to keep it simple here. Blessing, rebuke. V'im shahaya lahodi'em hadvarim ha'atidim lavo al zaram. Prediction of the future, which we just saw in the Ibn Ezra. V'im shahaya lahagid lahem nachalatam be'eretz hanivcheret. Or he wants to tell them something about their future stake in the land of Israel, their future inheritance. Blessing, rebuke, predicting their future, or discussing their stake in the land of Israel, their portions in the land of Israel. Now, where does Abarbanel get those four from? He read Perek Memtet, and he looked at all 12, I don't know what to call them now, brachot, okay? He looked at all 12 statements to each of the 12 sons, and he finds those four purposes. Some are blessings, some are rebuke, some are future prediction, and some are the stake in the land of Israel. And we'll skip the rest of paragraph 1 just in the interest of time, but he does a very good job saying, it feels like you're reading like the Aseret B'nai Haman, because he goes through and he's like, well, if you say blessing, it works really well for Yehuda, but what about Ruvain, Shimon, Levi, Yisachar, Gad, Binyamin? And he goes through each permutation. If you say Tochacha, it works really well for Ruvain, Shimon, Levi, Yisachar, Binyamin, but it doesn't work well for Yehuda, and I forgot the rest, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Yosef, right? So it gets a little funky, but basically what he's saying is you can't really pin any of those four as the purpose because they each only work for a limited number of the sons. Some of them get brachot, but not all of them. Some of them get tochacha, rebuke, but not all of them. Some of them get a prediction of their future, but not all of them. And some of them get a discussion of their stake in the land, like Zevulun lechof yamim yishkon, right? You're going to live near the sea. Great. That's amazing. I wish someone had told me where I was going to live when I was younger. It would have saved a lot of agony, right, over making the decision. So some of them are just getting news about their portion, but none of them are getting all four, and it's not a cohesive unit, says Abarbanel. So he says, let's keep going. Let's say we thought it could only be these four purposes, but let's see if we can identify a fifth possible purpose that would unify all the things that Yaakov says. He says, Ve'omnam, I'm in the second paragraph. When it comes to the motivation for these statements and blessings, da'ati noteh, in my opinion, right? I'm thinking, says the Abarbanel, sheYaakov be'et moto ratza levaer me'eze mibanav yatsa shevet hamalchut v'hamemshala bezaro. He's trying to winnow through each one and figure out which one is going to be worthy of the malchut. Who's going to be the leader? Because he's looking at his 12 sons, but he's seeing with his prophetic eye, this is going to be a huge nation. A huge nation's not going to function without some leadership, some structure. It's not going to work that all 12 are going to have, equal power. It's just not going to work. You need leadership in a nation that's going to be that big. Maybe a little too late, but so that no jealousy will befall his sons, right? We've been there, done that with Yosef, right? So that they don't spend the rest of eternity fighting over who's going to be the leader. This man decides at the end of his life, Livaer me'eze shevet mehem tiyeh ha'hanhaga v'halmalchut uvo melachim yamluchu. He says, I got to appoint, right? We see this actually very strongly that, and I know I've mentioned this, that one of the biggest failings of leadership in Tanakh is when the leader doesn't appoint a successor. And the biggest, maybe the most stunning place we see this is with Yehoshua. Because Moshe is so careful to take pains to appoint Yehoshua in front of the people, because it's the The people are not gonna, they need another leader. I'm gonna die. They're gonna freak out. They need to know who it is, and they need to see who it is that I appointed in front of them so that there's no questions. And then Yoshua dies and he doesn't appoint a successor. And, what follows is the 350 plus year period of Sefer Shoftim, which is total chaos and total anarchy because there's no strong central leadership. And that's what prompts the people to come to Shmuel in Sefer Shmuel and say, we need a king. This is not working. Okay, but that 360 something year period, that's a disaster. And I don't want to point fingers at Yoshua, but I can point fingers at no strong central leadership. So Yaakov sees that it's not going to work. So he says, let me go through each one. He literally holds each one up to the magnifying glass in front of him and in front of each other and investigates Well, let's look at Ruvain from all angles under the microscope. And, okay, spoiler here. No, that's okay. No, right? And let's look at Shimon and Levi and Yehuda. Let's hold them all up under a microscope. I'm going to say some stuff about who they are. And I'm then going to say basically, yay or nay. Okay, so according to Abarbanel, this is a process of investigating the nature of each of his sons so that he can determine, is this the son that's going to take on the leadership? And therefore, Zachar bechol echad mibanav, we can now encompass all 12 sons. Pa'am tichunotehem be'atzmam. Sometimes he has to say something about their own individual character, bracha or tochacha, good or bad. Oh, you're amazing. You, not so trustworthy, right? Sometimes it's going to be a positive statement like a bracha. Sometimes it's going to be a negative like rebuke. That's 2 of the original 4. Upa'am ha'atid lavo al zaram. Sometimes he has to tell them what will happen to their tribe in the future. Lo letachlit habracha, not as a blessing. V'lo letachlit hatochacha, and not as a rebuke. V'lo lahagid atidot, and not simply to tell the future. V'lo lesaper ma'alatam ba'aretz, and not to say something nice about where they're going to live. Ki'im lahodia im heim ra'ui lamalchut. Because maybe right now the actual son standing in front of him is not a terrible candidate, but some event might happen in the future which is going to throw it off or back on, right? So we know like the tribe of Levi at this point is going to get a very negative bracha. I still need a better word, a negative report from Yaakov. But we know that in the future, Levi is going to distinguish themselves very positively and they are going to take on the spiritual leadership. So I know we said that the character of the tribe represents the character of the man, but we also believe in rehabilitation and in teshuvah. So we know that things can go right or wrong from here. And so Yaakov's saying, like, sometimes I might need to say to you, you're wonderful, but I'm a little concerned about what's going to happen in the future. Or you're not so wonderful, but I'm really happy about something I see is going to happen. And so you're back on as a candidate for leadership. And perhaps something about where they live is also going to somehow fit in, or their industry, right, is also somehow perhaps going to fit in with whether or not they can be the leader. Okay, so Abarbanel says this whole thing, this is a search for the next leader. Yaakov is on his deathbed, and so he's handing over the reins. And there's a lot of reins that get to be handed over. There's Yaakov was, I mean, there weren't that many politics for Yaakov, but he was the spiritual Av, and he was also the political Av. He had the dealings with Paro, and he had the dealings with Avimelech, and just like Yitzchak and just like Avram. And now he's handing over to his sons, and instead of there being one candidate, there may be more than one candidate, because there may be more than one leadership position available, as we know to be true. The Chizkuni in source 5b says something interesting, and then we'll look at the actual, take a few minutes to look at some of the actual brachot. But the Chizkuni says, remember, Asher Yikra Etchem Be'acharit Hayamim, I'm going to tell you what's going to happen at the end of days. So Chizkuni says, well, this is actually a very specific phrase used in our psukim, because that Rashi thought that meant Acharit Hayamim, like the capital T and capital E of D capital days, right? Like the end of days, Mashiach. Ibn Ezra said, no, this is just like something that will happen to you and you and you and you and you at the end of days. Chizkuni says, 1 second. The pasuk says Be'acharit Hayamim, at the end of the days. Yamim lo ne'emar, it doesn't say at the end of days. Ela Hayamim, the end of the days, meaning a specific period of days, the days. Which days? Hey mevuarim kvar shekava hakadosh baruch hu la'Avraham Zekenai Zman Avdut Arba Me'ot Shana Bebrit Ben Havatarim. There's already an established period of days or years that this family has hanging over their heads, and that's the 400 years of Galut Mitzrayim that they're going to have to endure before coming out and being a nation. So when Yaakov says, let me tell you what's going to happen to you, Ba'acharit HaYamim, he doesn't mean if I pick Yehuda tomorrow, go out and buy a crown. He means Be'acharit HaYamim, at the end of that very specific time period of 400 years, this is what's going to happen. You're going to be a real nation, and you're going to need real leaders. And therefore, this tribe for this, and this tribe, nope, and this tribe, maybe, and this tribe, we'll see, right? But it's a very specific role, and therefore a very specific time period that Yaakov's referring to when he says, let me tell you what's going to happen later, not Mashiach later, not next week later, but in 400 years when you guys have long gone, but your descendants have comprised this huge nation that I can see is going to need strong central leadership. It's very interesting. Okay, so if we now look at the first four brachot, four sons, okay, Shimon and Levi get their message together. So I have 3 boxes here on the source sheet, Shimon, but there are 4 sons comprised, included in these 4 boxes because Shimon and Levi get to share. We'll see that this fits very well in the Abarbanel's paradigm, right? Ruvain, Bechori ata kochi v'reishit oni, you're my firstborn, my might, the first fruit of my vigor. Yeter se'et v'yeter az, you exceed in rank and you exceed in honor. Pachas kamayim al totar, however, you're unstable like water. Ki alita mishkavei avicha, because you climbed up on your father's bed. Az chilalta yitzui Allah. We're going to look at each son carefully, but let's first look at the pattern. Okay, so Ruvain, so much going for you. So much going for you. Reshit oni yeter se'et, the yeter az, you had everything going for you, the first of this and the first of that, but you're unstable as water, so you're out. Okay. Shimon v'Levi achim, Shimon and Levi, your brothers, klei Hamas mecherotehem, their weapons are tools of Hamas, not like the terrorist group, but like just anarchy, chaos, right? Hamas is the problem that plagued us since the beginning of Dor HaMabul, since almost the beginning of time, the generation of Noach. There we interpret it to mean stealing with no compunction and no guilt, just lawlessness and immorality. Bisodam al tavo nafshi, let me not be included in their secret. Bikahalam al techad kvodi, let me not be counted in their gathering. Ki be'apam hargu ish, because in their anger they killed a man. Ovir tsonam ikru shor, and when they wanted to, they hamstrung, or it says here, they maimed an ox. Arur apam ki az, their anger is cursed because it's bold. Ve'evratam ki kashata, their wrath, again, their anger because it's harsh. Achal kein be'Yaakov ve'afitzein be'Yisrael. I'll disperse them and scatter them amongst the Jewish tribes. Okay, so Shimon and Levi, not leaders. There's too much going on there. Again, we'll look more carefully. Yehuda, we knew this was coming, right? Ata yoducha achecha. Oh, Yehuda, your brothers will acknowledge you as leader. Yadcha be'oref oivecha. Your hands will be on the nape of your enemies' necks. Ishtachavu lecha b'nei avicha. The sons of your father will bow to you. Gur aryeh Yehuda. Yehuda's like a lion cub. Lions are the king, right? Miteref b'nei alita. You rose up from the destruction of my sons. Kara ravatz ka'aryeh ukilavi miyakimenu. He crouches like a lion, and like a lion, who dares wake up the sleeping lion, right? Nobody. Lo yasur shevet mi Yehuda, the scepter will never depart from Yehuda. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, we'll come back to Yehuda. I don't want to blah, blah, blah him, but we'll come back. Okay, so Abarbanel's saying, well, look at what Yaakov's doing. He's not blessing. It's all over the place because he's literally holding Ruvain up to that microscope and going, no. Shimon and Levi? I don't think so. Yehuda? Okay, and of course we know Yehuda does get the Malchut. This bracha is where Yehuda does receive the blessing of being the kings. Lo yasur shevet mi Yehuda. The scepter will never depart from Yehuda. He's always going to have the kingship, right? Again, we know from our learning of Navi that it got complicated, but the scepter of kingship never did depart from Yehuda and lasted longer than any other dynasty. And we believe Mashiach is going to be Mashiach ben David, is going to come back from the dynasty of Yehuda. Okay, time check. Okay,
10.
Okay, we'll do Ruvain. Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, amazing. Okay, so let's talk about Ruvain a little bit. So Ruvain, we're gonna look in source 7a. Ruvain is interesting. I teach about Ruvain a lot in school, and like, I actually was talking about this topic, talking about Ruvain recently, not here, and one of my former students was like, I remember everything you said about Ruvain. I was like, yes, obviously, because I'm such a good teacher, but no, it's really, I'm kidding. Ruvain's really memorable. He's really memorable, and like Rav Hirsch, I think says it the best. So let's look at source 7a as we start to talk about Ruvain. Rav Hirsch says, as the firstborn, right? Bechoriata, Yaakov says about Ruvain, right? Ruvain bechoriata, kochi, vereshit oni, you were the first of everything. As the firstborn, you have the calling to be the nasi of your brothers. It's the default, right? The default is that the oldest is going to be the leader. That's the whole secret of the bechora, right? The default, the oldest is the most responsible. The default that you turn to your oldest, you rely on them the soonest and the first and the most. The head and leader of the family, and therefore too to receive a greater portion of material power, the double inheritance, so that the material foundation for the spiritual leadership may not be wanting. We can't have Ruvain so busy leading the people spiritually that he starves, right? And he's not going to be busy in theory if he takes this leadership. He's going to be busy serving the people, much like the Levi and Kohen. And so he's going to need double the materialism so that he can survive on a job that does not feed him materially. He's not making money from his job. He doesn't have, I mean, he'll have land, but I'm saying in theory, right? He's so busy serving the people that he's going to need more materially because his calling spiritually is greater. Now, Rav Hirsch in his Lishitato classic loves shorashim of words. And so he's always going to say, well, this root is, we see it in these 27 other places. It's related to this root. He says here, it is to be regretted that the root pachaz kamayim, we translated that as unstable. It is to be regretted that the root pachaz does not occur more frequently. He's like, it's a little bit of a hard place here because pachaz kamayim, we don't really know, that word pachaz is not overly familiar to us. But from Sefer Shoftim, which is spelled wrong in this parentheses, I'm sorry, it says shortim, it says Shoftim. But from Sefer Shoftim, anashim rekim upochazim, people who are empty and pachaz, we can see that it's some shortcoming in character. We get that it's a negative word. Pachaz is not a positive word, but we still do not know which shortcoming. Unfortunately, here it is compared to water. The reason that's unfortunate is that there's hardly anything else that lends itself to such a variety of qualities as water, right? It's saying, oh, your pachaz like water. Water has so many things you could say about it. How do we narrow down what pachaz, what is Yaakov trying to say to Ruvain? And Rav Hirsch gives us two really interesting ideas. Water has no internal stability, hence it could mean unstable as water, which is what our translation from Sefaria went with. And I like this one. Water always flows downwards to the lowest level. It strives after lowness. It drops to the lowest common denominator, right? Ruvain, your pachaz, kamayim, like water, you always go down. You always fall short. You always drop to that lowest level as opposed to reaching for something higher. But as nevertheless, he says here, you are the most precious gem in my treasury. You are kochi v'reshit oni. But for the leader, you're amazing. But for the leadership of the family, you are not qualified. I love this part so much. For that, one must be az. Az is the opposite of pachaz. Pachaz is like unstable and flowing like water, right? Lowest flowing to the lower level. Az is like you're like stubborn. You're so stuck in your place. You're not fluid at all. You're rigid. One may not be moved, in order to be the leader, one may not be moved by soft, flattering winds, nor by stormy hurricanes, as water is moved. One must have strong inner fitness and not be unstable like water. So like, you're a great guy. You have a lot going for you, Ruvain. That's actually very kind to Ruvain. It's kinder than I am in my Chumash class, a little bit. But you've got a lot. Yeter se'eit, yeter az, you're kochi v'reshit oni, you're the bechor, you're amazing. But you don't have what it takes to be a leader because you're like water, and water is so easy to move, and a leader can't be that easy to move. A leader has to sometimes stand for what he stands for. He can't be so easy to manipulate, right? That's Achashverosh. He was so easy to manipulate, like water. That wasn't good. It worked not in our favor, and then it did work in our favor, but that doesn't say a lot of great stuff about his leadership, right? Whenever in Tanakh we come across a foreign king, there's always a little shtuch, to like that foreign king, Paro, Achashverosh, others. There are very few that escape, the Torah's little almost satire of bad kingship. I think Koresh makes that okay. But you can't be like water. And if we think about Ruvain's story, we can just bullet point, because if we had a 12-part series, we could spend a whole night on Ruvain. It's a 3-part, so we can only bullet point, right? But if we bullet point Ruvain's story, we have 3 main examples of his instability, and they really boil down to one thing. When he moves his father's bed from Bilhah's tent to Leah's tent, that's what Yaakov refers to, Alita mishkevei avicha, right? You climbed up on your father's bed. The psukim there say he literally did climb on his father's bed. The Midrash comes along and says, I don't think it was quite as bad as that. I don't think Ruvain slept with Bilhah, but I think something did happen that Ruvain interfered with his father's intimacy. He attempts to save Yosef by throwing him in a pit, but it's a failed attempt. Okay. And the third one is when Yaakov says, I can't send Binyamin down to Egypt. I just can't risk losing him. And Ruvain goes, I have the greatest idea. If I don't bring Binyamin back, you can kill 2 of my sons, who are Yaakov's grandsons. So that doesn't make anybody feel better. And it's a terrible offer. And it's basically a meaningless offer, right? So this is the watery quality of Ruvain, where it just can't be trusted. Because instead of standing up as like a leader and saying, we're not harming Yosef today. No. He's like, yeah, hate him, kill him. It's watery, it's fluid, it's not it's not firm. You can't count on it. And you need to be able to count on it. So Ruvain is not fit for leadership, and therefore his leadership gets revoked. And I want to say one more thing about Ruvain, and then we'll pick up next week. But if you look at source 7b, and I'll put the sources new in again, just so that we don't have to hold on to this source sheet. Look at what Rashi says. It's fascinating. Yeter se'et, from Yaakov's bracha, Ra'ui hayita lihiyot yeter al achecha bikehuna. Not only were you the Bechor and you lost it to Yosef, but you would have been the Kohen and you lost it to Levi. Lashon nisiut kapayim, right? The Kohanim are nosei kapayim. You were yeter se'et. The yeter az b'malchut. And you also would have been king. Kemo vayitain oz l'malko, that the king gets oz, brazenness, bravery, boldness. Umi garam lecha lahafsid kol eila. And how come you lost it, Ruvain? Oh, pachaz kamayim. You were unstable. So Ruvain would have been the trifecta. He would have been the Bechor, the Kohen, and the king. He would have had it all. And says Yaakov, pachaz kamayim, that instability, that lack of ability to trust Ruvain and what he's, you can never count on him that he's going to do what you think he says he's going to do, because he's always a little sneaky, right? He's pachaz. He has that watery quality. He had a lot going for him, said Rav Hirsch, but because he was not trustworthy, because he was unstable, he loses all 3. So we'll save Shimon and Levi and onward for next time, but we'll try to keep in mind, and I'll remind you, that we're dealing with the Abarbanel's framework here of how do we determine leadership amongst the tribes and who's going to make it the cut and who's not going to make the cut. There's still going to be a tribe. There's still going to be special. They're still going to be counted, but they're not going to count for that special position of leadership. So we'll stop here for tonight, and we will, God willing, continue next Monday night. Okay? Great.
You're gonna be back, you think?
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Hi.
Hi, thank you. That was very nice.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for coming. Just late.
No, that's just saying,
Yeah, we just got that.
Oh, amazing.
well, it's done.
Oh my gosh. So now how long are you here? Next couple months? Okay, so-
With the bus.
Last month. Where do you live in Israel? Where's your Oh gosh, wow, awesome. Thank you. It's very special. Oh my gosh. Very nice to have you back. Yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering if it's I don't even like. Right, I wasn't-
She lives across the street. She, oh gosh, it's a bring back, whatever. What? Don't tell me he's out. I know he's out. Yeah.
Yeah, testing location at Concourse H allows Concourse G. So Concourse H is the testing. And it's, I guess the next one or two over, yeah. I'm assuming, I don't know if they have. And you can listen us on repeat if you need, if I can need help.
Thank you, that's.
So I'm just wondering, you know, we don't, I'm sure. Oh, no, not to just in case it's. But, just wanted to, you know, warn us that it's out, just, hey.
Okay, machine, okay. I do not. What? I know that. I know that's okay. It's always really erotic. That was a joke. Erotic is not.
Josh Mirabah, Yamati Rock here, David, let's one potato, but I saw you, the son, I did the police rep, my glove is not created for man. Rocky, Ferrari, Ruvain, the city, the army, the lady, the last week, the shot, break food. Melly, Potiphar, Potiphar, the Disma, the Benacamata, the Rambo, Ruvain. God tells the hundred, the whole Israel, the Honey, Ishmael, and Ruvain. Each or of each mile, the final lane of Israel, and Positional lane of Israel, and links. Not neutral, so the thing they can have. Then I'm already on the knowledge of Juarez, when we were in the y'all be Josh Mirabah. Yamati Ross here, kid, on this one to say. By a hug, the fun, the trade, the of Israel, like a lot of smart reading, Ruvain. You rock, you squawk, you bar, we come on, be the say. The jar, be a lady, a lost, the jar, and the. I was wondering, it didn't seem like it was. No, I just. Because we're both, you were saying that.